Hello there guys and welcome back to the channel. So this is going to be my guide for Come Out to Play Abyss Carina Challenge Volume 2. I'm going to go over exactly what I did, how much it cost me, what mastery setup I run, and we're going to be taking a look at some alternatives as well. Additionally, there will be a video coming on the channel in the next day or two, depending how busy I am, about perhaps taking alternative routes in Abyss, because there are a lot of people who have done only one path and want to use this opportunity to perhaps do another entire path. So I'm going to go over which path I perhaps suggest to do, doing which challenges. I do advise staying away from path 4 at large, because that is by far the hardest path as is. I do think that path 5 is probably doable with some of these teams, as well as path 2 and 3. But we're going to break that down in a separate video. For now, though, we're going to be talking about Come Out to Play. So my team for the challenge was... One second, I need to find where it shows here, so you guys have an illustrative example. Here we go. This was my team. My team was Symbiote Supreme, rank 2, and Stealth Suit Spider-Man. Stealth Suit Spider-Man was kind of like an extra. I didn't really need him. I brought him as a option in case my Miles strategy didn't work out. But Miles' strategy worked out perfectly, so you can actually replace him, Stealth Suit Spider-Man, with something else. Agent Venom was really good and is very useful for this. He can actually solo several fights due to his heal reverse. Then we have Miles, which main job was Dormammu, and obviously the solo of Luke Cage. Miles is an absolute beast in that regard. And then we had Null, which was kind of our MVP. So that was my team. I run Liquid Courage Double Edge throughout the entire thing, and I did have Max Limber as well. The one kind of like sacrifice that I did kind of make, I only had MD3. I wish I had placed on MD5. It probably would have saved me a couple of revives with Sim Supreme fights. But even at MD3, he did what he had to do just about well enough. So I used in total 17 revives and 1 team revive, and this was the cheapest and the easiest Abyss challenge, I think, in my opinion, largely because you do not have to do the entire path. You can stop at Green Goblin and you do not have to finish it up. So that was my team. Let's check out the path that I took. The path is basically the same path I always took, path 3 mixed with path 1 up until Green Goblin here. So instead of going to Cyclops, I went to Green Goblin. And that was, I think, the most effective path. Starting with Darkhawk, my choice was Null. It took me 1 revive, I believe. You can also actually use Agent Venom for the fight, and he is capable of soloing that fight. There is a fair finicky playstyle, but I'm sure that there will be a video how to exactly do it with Agent Venom. And then we have Luke Cage. As I mentioned before, Miles' Cheese Factory. It took a while. It took like 1,000 hits, I believe. But Miles soloed that fight because Luke Cage was basically unstoppable all the time. And I was just spamming heavy attacks and that's it. Alternatively, Anti-Venom also is capable of doing that fight, in my opinion. Then moving on, Old Man Logan. That was a solo with Anti-Venom as well. Havoc, I believe, was 2 revives or 3. It was, I think, 2 or 3 revives. You can do it in 1 revive for sure against Havoc. Just build up your Null up to like 80 or 75 Living Abyss, and then go ham on him. Dormammu with Miles against Joe Fixit. I started it with Null, I did well enough, and then I brought in Agent Venom, and Agent Venom can just absolutely cheese. The strategy with Agent Venom against Joe Fixit is to basically set up your heal reverse as much as you can. So the level 1, all the Spectre debuffs, everything else, use some heavy attacks, and then start eating heavy attacks from Joe Fixit on purpose yourself until he rolls on the healing card. And when he starts healing, you know, he's just going to be degenerating. Then against Mordo, I used Null, because Null has true accuracy on his mediums and heavies. So Null is a fairly good Mordo counter as well. Can be done in like a couple of revives easy. Against Venom the Duck, I used Symbiote Supreme. That is a very cheesable fight with Symbiote Supreme. Howard the Duck was 1 revive, I believe, with Null. Not too bad at all. Then Hyperion and Champion were both Symbiote Supreme fights. and Green Goblin was null as well. So for most part, it was, again, very straightforward run. I definitely wasted a couple of revives, but it was very cheap still, comparatively speaking. Only like 17 singles, 1 team revive, and that could have been done, you know, half in as many revives. But that was my last challenge, and I was determined to push through it, even if I was messing up. Right, so that being said, let's take a look back at everything else here. Right, again, when it comes to my mastery setup, I think I show my mastery setup at the end somewhere when somebody asked towards the end, so maybe it didn't. But it was a basic Liquid Courage double edge mastery setup with some MD and Limber in. There was nothing special or fancy about it. And the alternatives. I do think that Null is overall the MVP. However, I think for most of the fights, Null can also be kind of replaced either with Penny Parker and Mysterio synergy, because Mysterio and Penny Parker can put in a ton of work as well. And they can work as your healing mitigators against Old Man Logan. I do think that Mysterio is capable of soloing that fight also. And I think then Venom or Venom Pool can work as a decent alternative as like your kind of main damage dealer. Obviously, Stealth Suit Spider-Man is another option that's going to be long but perfectly viable. But if you do not have Null and Anti-Venom, it's kind of like the biggest comments that I have heard. Because Anti-Venom and Null both are fairly new champions. And Anti-Venom was genuinely quite important against dealing with, you know, Old Man Logan, and he was helpful for Joe Fixit, and he was just he also can do the Luke Cage fight, he can do the Darkhawk fight, he can do some other fights down the line. So what to do without them? Obviously, your main players are going to be Symbiote Supreme, which is kind of like a very needed champion here, either if you take the same path that I did, or even if you take the regular path 1, because Symbiote Supreme is definitely needed also for dealing with CMM. But I still think that taking this path is by far quicker and easier because it's less fight, and you do avoid some very annoying fights like Iron Man Infinity War, CMM, and Mephisto. That all being said, I think the best strategy obviously is Null. After Null, Mysterio with Penny Parker should also be definitely extremely capable team. Then let's go through fight per fight, and I'm going to be suggesting kind of counters. And Darkhawk. Against Darkhawk, I think it could actually be quite tricky to find better options than Null or Anti-Venom. Because, again, you either reverse the regeneration or you, well, just power through it. So for that fight, I think a decent alternative could potentially be Spider-Ham. I think Spider-Ham is capable of doing that fight quite well, and you just need to slow play, and you need to utilize the best of your power stings. You could trigger your evades, and you take less special damage, and Darkhawk's going to be gaining your power, so he's going to be throwing a lot of special attacks. So I think with Spider-Ham, you can have quite decent alternative to Null and Anti-Venom. Other than that, it can sound maybe funny. I think Symbiote Spider-Man, if you happen to have like a rank 5, can do that fight relatively well, largely by parrying, heavying, making sure the armor breaks are there on all the time, and then, you know, dropping some big level 2s as and when, just wait for that shield to expire. Also, having armor break on Darkhawk will prevent him from taking away your power. So those are the options for that fight that I do recommend. Now we have Luke Cage, which obviously is a problem. Against Luke Cage, the oldest strategy is Stealth Suit Spider-Man. Stealth Suit Spider-Man is capable of soloing that fight as well with slow, but it is, you know, significantly trickier. Outside of Stealth Suit Spider-Man, the best cheese, as I said, was Miles, an easy solo without much to worry about. And then we also have Anti-Venom, because he has A, Deaccelerate, which can work as a slow, and B, he also has Staggers. Now, I think many of us have also seen Suida, I believe, solo that fight with Spider-Gwen. If you are a good Spider-Gwen player, I think Spider-Gwen can put in decent amount of work, especially if you can forego the ramp-up process of Spider-Gwen with Penny Parker, and that is the team that you have built there. Now, moving on to Old Man Logan. Again, that is a regeneration that you have to deal with, either by having loads of debuffs and having the spare work, or having the ability to reverse it. I'm not actually entirely sure how it interacts with Dr. Octopus. Dr. Octopus might be an option, but I am not 100% certain of that. So, other than those guys, again, I do think that Anti-Venom is the best option. Null can do that fight by himself as well, because he is obviously a debuff factory. Now, other champions, it could be quite tricky, because he, if you don't solo that fight, he's going to start with a very sizable regeneration. I do think Mysterio can likely solo that fight with Penny synergy, just spamming heavy attacks, letting poison, heal mitigation do the work, or even have a passive heal block, as an option too. I think Symbiote Spider-Man, again, ironically, I know he's not the champion that you typically want to rank, can do very well there, because you can just spam heavy attacks, do a ton of damage per hit, and do those big level 2s as a result of it, especially if you happen to have that maybe Green Goblin synergy. So I do think that Symbiote Spidey can do quite solid work. Other than that, I'm not entirely sure who would kind of be better options. I can see Carnage being able to put on a lot of debuffs quickly, therefore perhaps working decently well. I can see maybe Venom being able to put in some work, but I'm not too sure on that. I have not tried that fight myself with those. So I kind of recommend sticking to Mysterio, Symbiote Spidey, Anti-Venom, or Null as your best options there. Moving on to the next fight, we have Havoc. Against Havoc, there are plenty of options. Vast majority of the champions can do Havoc, especially if you do not actively bleed like crazy, unless you're Venom and have an armor buff, or don't crit like crazy. Because with Havoc, you can just block bait, heavy attacks, push him to level 2s, and you're going to be fine. So against Havoc, I personally did with Null. It's quite easy. I think Anti-Venom is a good option. I do think Spider-Ham can probably do a very good job there as well. I do think that Dr. Octopus obviously is capable of doing extremely well in that fight. And then on top of that, Venom is also going to be a very powerful option there. Right, moving on to the next fight, alternate options. We have Dormammu, and Dormammu obviously can be tricky for a lot of these champions, so you need to make sure that you do not have any buffs, basically. Other than that, you can just remove dexterity and you're going to be pretty much perfectly safe. So you can use Spider-Gwen, you can use Penny. I used Miles and he did well enough. You can definitely use Symbiote Spider-Man 2099, even though I don't necessarily recommend bringing him in the first place. I do think Null can probably do that fight well enough as well, and Anti-Venom. So there are definitely plenty of options. Just choose a champion that doesn't rely on poison like Mysterio, and doesn't gain buffs. Other than that, the fight's easy. Just remove dexterity if you want to be super safe. Joe Fixit is kind of brute forceable with anyone. Joe Fixit is a fairly basic fight. It's quite long. If you do not have Anti-Venom for the heal reverse, then you just want to use any champion that deals, the best damage, or I don't know, throw a team revive that way, and you're going to be just about fine. Don't worry about it too much. Mordo can be tricky, obviously, with his evade, and again, you can't really use champions that rely on many buffs. Null is a good option. Anti-Venom is a good option. I think probably Penny can work reasonably well. Also, Spider-Ham would do very well for that fight. I think Miles Morales can do very well for that fight, especially having access to Taunt, having easier time betting out those special attacks, not relying on buffs. And again, Spider-Gwen would work there also. The key thing is just make sure that you plan for each and every single one of these fights. Now, Venom the Duck. Now, that fight will be a problem if you do not have Symbiote Supreme. As we can see, there are virtually no other Mystic champions there that you could use. Venom the Duck is and would be a problem unless you have Symbiote Supreme. I can see potentially maybe a Penny Parker working, because she does have power control, and once you kind of get the fight going, you're going to be doing fairly well. Spider-Gwen might do quite well with her underweights. Therefore, you know, you can still maintain to be aggressive. And Spider-Ham, just playing carefully and baiting out a ton of special attacks. Those are kind of like the better options, I think, there if you do not have Symbiote Supreme. Miles with Town Debuff could also do reasonably well, in my opinion. But yeah, Symbiote Supreme is clearly the best option there. Howard the Duck, again, it's just kind of a basic fight. You can use virtually anybody for that fight. Howard the Duck doesn't require anybody special. You just start the fight out with spamming heavy attacks, and once you get rid of the indestructible charges, you can use virtually anyone. And remember, he's not bleed immune in this quest because that is pre-update Howard the Duck. Now, Hyperion, again, without Symbiote Supreme, there are limited amount of options. I do think Spider-Gwen, again, is a quite good option for Hyperion because of the underweight and slow. So I do think Spider-Gwen could potentially work extremely well. Maybe Spider-Man 2099, but it would be tricky to get to that level 3 in time before the Unstoppable procs. I do think Anti-Venom can do a very solid job there because he does have Petrifies, he does have Deaccelerate, and he does have Staggers. So I think Anti-Venom can do a very good job there also. And as a crazier kind of like potential options, maybe Venom or Venom Pull. I'm not entirely sure how well it would work, but at the very least, you could be able to get rid of the power gains, and also then you can parry and maybe eat up the Unstoppable, possibly. Not sure how well that would work. Have not tried it myself, but it's worth giving it a look. And after Hyperion, we have Champion, which is basically pretty much all the same options there. There's not much difference in that fight. And finally, we have Green Goblin. Now, Green Goblin, you either need armor breaks to do damage, or you need damage over time effects. So against Green Goblin, alternate strategy could potentially be with Anti-Venom, try and reverse his regeneration, because he does have plenty of that inherent. I used Null. It can be done like 2 revives with Null. And Venom has armor break and damage over time effects, so Venom could do well enough. I think Venom Pull can do well enough because he does have very potent bleeds. Aside from that, we again have Symbiote Spider-Man, where you can just heavy attack to the death. After Symbiote Spider-Man, I think Spider-Ham's power stings should be able to function fine. Or obviously we have Mysterio, who is likely able to solo that fight or two-shot that fight with Penny Synergy, just spamming heavy attacks. Sure, there is some way how you can incorporate Vulture in that as well, but I'm not sure how many of you have ranked up Vulture, but those are kind of like my suggestions. Obviously, the trick there would be to make sure you can cover all of the fights with 5 champions. And you guys saw the team that I used. I was perfectly happy with the team that I used. Didn't really have much to worry. There wasn't a single fight where I wished that I had brought necessarily somebody else. For the most part, all the deaths were on me. And that's about it. Once again, default view. Here we go. All the deaths were really on me, and I don't have much to complain there. That is it about this guide. Let me know if you have any other questions. As I said, it is worth pondering if for some of these challenges, maybe not necessarily this one, I don't think that it's worth doing an entire path for this one afterwards. Maybe only finishing off here, but which path would you do? Could you do path 2? Yeah, for Symbiote Challenge, I think it actually could be doable to do path 2 instead, if you have Anti-Venom for Mephisto and Symbiote Supreme for this fight. I think then it could potentially be doable as a full-on path 2, and except Deadpool. That's, again, something that I would need to look into deeper. But, again, for this challenge itself, I think it's just better to get to Green Goblin. You can do it quite cheap, you can do it quite effective, and then leave alternate paths, so to speak, exploration for Carina's challengers or for full-on mutant run. Right, again, if you do have any questions, let me know, and I'm gonna catch you guys soon. See ya!
Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about